Big shout out to Maddie, Angela, and Ethan for becoming new patrons this week. Thank you, friends. Love you lots. Heads up, this week's episode is a deep dive into gender dysphoria feels. Please take care of yourself, friend. My name is Callie Wright, and this is Queersplaining. Hello, dysphoria, you fucking dick. I thought I was done with you, but here we are. I just realized I called it a dick. That's funny. So I've had this nagging feeling the last few weeks. It was a familiar feeling, and it was one that I desperately did not want to feel. I knew what was happening, and that's why I knew I didn't want it. I remember the earliest moments of gender dysphoria for me were like this weird, nebulous sort of, this isn't quite right feeling. I wasn't able to nail it down specifically because I didn't know what it was, and I was a kid. I started feeling it before I knew what transness was, right? But later on in life, figuring out what it was, putting a name to it, it allowed those feelings to come into really sharp focus. And this was when I learned one of the more counterintuitive things about transness. Sometimes coming out and beginning transition can make dysphoria worse before it makes it better. I went from this nebulous feeling of wrongness to having a very clear idea of what was wrong, what I needed to fix it, and more importantly, just exactly how far away from my ideal I was. Learning all of the answers to those questions was a necessary piece of the journey, but it also meant those feelings got more intense and more uncomfortable before things got better. Someone in a support group suggested that I should sit down and write out what my transition priorities and goals were. And of course, they failed to mention those things could change. How was I supposed to know? I learned that later. But I thought it was a good idea, so I did it. The top two things on the first list I ever made were breast augmentation and voice training. I didn't have insurance at this point, and I was still pretty poor, working a really, really shitty job. So the idea of any kind of surgery seemed so far off and unattainable. But I knew breast augmentation was generally less expensive than bottom surgery, and my physical dysphoria was most intense around my breasts at that time. So that's the surgery I put at the top of the list. And I knew DIY voice training was possible. I found some apps and some YouTube videos and decided I was going to try to train my voice to sound more feminine. Bottom surgery was definitely on the list, but that was one of those things that just felt so far away and so unattainable. I did have pretty crushing bottom dysphoria, but I knew I'd be forced to lose weight to get it. I knew I'd need a lot of money, and neither of those things felt within reach at all. So that went lower on the list too. Getting rid of my facial hair was lower on the list too. It was always there, but I thought shaving and makeup tricks would be enough until I could afford laser, so it didn't feel like a super immediate need either. Now that didn't end up being true. I could never shave close enough. I could never do makeup well enough. My facial hair was so thick and so dark. At best, I could make it sort of hard to see for like half a day. It was exhausting. I looked in the mirror at my face and I hated it. I glanced downward at my chest and I hated it. And this was the space I lived in for a long time. So facial hair moved near the top of my list over time. And eventually I did find a stable job and insurance, right? The call center job that I always talk about. I was able to afford laser and electrolysis for my face. I was using YouTube videos and phone apps for voice training. I was working at a call center, so I had the chance to practice. But over time, I just sort of stopped caring about my voice. I realized that it was more about appeasing the people around me than what I felt comfortable with and what I actually needed. I didn't actually hate my voice. This was right at the beginning of the podcast too, so I was used to hearing myself, and voice stuff just stopped being a priority. Then I found out my insurance covered bottom surgery, and I had no idea how long that would last, so bottom surgery went to the top of my priority list. Not because it was actually the most important, I just knew without insurance, that'd be the hardest thing to get, and I wanted to get it while I knew I could. Who knows what could happen in the future, right? And that was a good call because I got laid off like a year after. And I've talked about this before, but I was shocked to find that all of my other dysphoria seemed to go away after bottom surgery. I was suddenly cool with how my breasts looked. I'd long since stopped caring about my voice and even grew to like it. Laser didn't kill all my facial hair, but so long as I shaved once every few days, it was almost invisible. I knew there would probably be mental things to work out still. There are always mental things to work out, of course. And of course there were, figuring out I was non-binary was one of those things. And that wasn't directly about my body, although I think I needed to have bottom surgery as a prerequisite to figure that out. But it was mostly an internal thing. And so after working all of that out, I felt pretty good. I've learned enough to know the journey's never really over. But I felt comfortable that most of my major life changes were behind me. I had uprooted my life, changed a bunch of shit around, figured a whole bunch of things out, and I had arrived. My transness will always be a part of me, of course. I'm not ashamed of it. I've even grown to like it. Yes, I like that I'm transgender. But it was also nice to be in a place where I could live my life based on other things about me, like Star Trek and roller derby and my love for coffee and all of those other quirky things about me that are important to me. I like providing support and community for people. All of that stuff is cool. And since I had my transness mostly figured out, it didn't have to quite rule my life like it did for those first few years. And as positive and affirming as that journey has turned out to be, getting there was really hard. And I'm still working out trauma from that period of my life, right? I've talked about all the problems with my job, the constant fear of being in public. That stuff still sticks with me. I'm really, really glad that period of my life is over. I'm very glad to have left that awkward, unsure, transitory period of my life behind. And since I'm doing a whole episode here based on that monologue, you can probably guess what's coming. That dysphoria is back with a fucking vengeance, and I am not stoked about it. It's been simmering for a few weeks now. It started to creep back in slowly. And at first I thought, that's weird. Hopefully that'll pass. I've had other more acute short moments of that, mostly when I'm super stressed or anxious or exhausted. I've been working out a lot of things in therapy lately, and I thought to myself, you're on the right path, you're just not super stable yet, so your brain's just going all over the place. So just be patient, and these feelings will probably pass. And reader, they did not. It was the same familiar gender dysphoria feeling tugging at my psyche, and I responded with a naive denial, kind of like I did the first time years and years and years ago. Remind me again how far I've come? But of course, now the denial is different, right? The denial now is a denial that knows where I've been. It's the denial that remembers how awkward and self-conscious I felt. The first time I met my friend Eric at the movie theater wearing a dress that did not look good on me and wearing makeup that was very badly done, having a purse that didn't match my outfit. Every time I walked into a room and saw the little subtle double takes where people were trying to hide the double takes, but I could see them, I remember how that felt and I didn't like it. And I desperately don't want to go back to that place mentally. And then I reached the point where part of me feels silly for being so worked up about it, right? Practically, there are 3 things I feel like I need to fix at the moment. 1, I want to get electrolysis to kill the remaining facial hair I have. Laser is great, highly recommended. And like I said, if I shave once every couple of days, it's kind of impossible to tell that I have facial hair. Not a big deal. This involves nothing major in my life except spending a little bit less money on one thing so I can afford electrolysis. So I just got to redo the budget and then take some time to get it done, right? Not a super huge big deal at all, and probably won't even be super noticeable to the people in my life. Number 2, I'm really going to pursue getting breast augmentation. This is a thing tons of people do, right? Cis and trans both. A noticeable thing, but not something that I feel self-conscious or nervous about. Surgery is not the funnest thing in the world, and I'm going to have to save up money and maybe crowdfund to get there. But in the end, not a big deal for the outside world. Very big deal for me. So again, in the grand scheme of things, not uprooting my life there, not changing anything major. But number 3 is where my brain really starts to turn to mush. I I've grown really unhappy with my voice. And I'm not sure why or where this feeling has come from, but it was literally just a few months ago, right? Like I did a whole thing on where I'd come to actually like my voice, not just be okay with it, but actually like it. And I'm not really sure why that's changed. And I'm like really nervous and self-conscious about changing my voice. The feeling isn't just about trans stuff either, right? Like I played in bands. I would almost never show my bandmates half-formed ideas. I would sit at home alone in front of my desk with my headphones on and play around with something until it was formed enough to show someone else. I could never work up the courage to show someone a work in progress. But that's kind of how it has to work with voice stuff. If I do this, my voice is going to be a work in progress for a while, and that's going to have to play out in full view of my friends and family and the random strangers I meet, like at the grocery store. Most of the people in my life now are people who never knew me before coming out. There's comfort in that. It puts me in control of how much of my transness I bring to my relationships. That's a dial I get to turn. And going back to quote unquote work in progress mode when it comes to trans stuff means that like I feel like I'm giving over that safety and comfort and control to the other people in my life. And I love and trust my friends and family. The relationships that we're going to end or change over me being trans, like that ship sailed a long fucking time ago. I know my friends and family have my back. But like, it's one thing to know that safety net exists. It's another thing entirely to make yourself dependent on that safety net. And I think there's part of me that was just emotionally invested in having gender stuff settled. And I know I'm the one who's always preaching about how like this can be a lifelong journey. But I'm also the champion of giving other people the grace I won't give myself. So fucking here we are. I was comfortable because I was convinced that like any further gender explanation for me would be about like haircuts or clothing style or like figuring out new and different aspects of my personality. But it turns out there's like lots of stuff up for grabs, I guess. When I came out initially, it upended my life. I lost a job, I lost 2 family relationships, and I came out of it with trauma that I will probably carry with me for the rest of my life. But I made it. Right? I was lucky enough to come out on the other side with this amazing community of friends and family who love me for the core of who I am as a person, regardless of queerness, transness, or whatever, or maybe even because of queerness, transness, or whatever. And that's all cool. In the grand scheme of things, I'm not sure it's possible for me to upend my life any further than that. So on one level, I feel kind of silly about how much I'm freaking out about this. When I came out, I wasn't totally sure I had a safe place to land. At this point, I'm 100% sure I have a safe place to land. And I feel like in terms of how people relate to me, asking them to use they, them pronouns was probably a heavier lift than just saying like, hey, you're going to have to get used to me sounding different. But it just feels like a really big deal to me. My voice is an important piece of how I communicate. It's a thing that people associate with me and who I am. It's part of how I pay my bills and engage in activism and community building. I think I'm just realizing that my voice is more a part of my core identity than I thought it was. And that's probably part of the reason I'm freaking out so much about it, among all of the other aforementioned reasons. So I guess the moral of the story is the journey really can be about everything forever, and that's okay. I try my hardest to see these moments as a gift, right? Like it's complicated, of course, because I'm privileged enough to get to see it that way. And I'm privileged enough to know that I can work through this stuff in relative safety. And I'm definitely not into toxic positivity, right? Like I don't think it's cool to tell anyone else how they should feel or how they shouldn't feel. But for me, I'm trying really hard to see this as a chance to just like grow more fully into the most comfortable version of myself. It's going to be hard and awkward and maybe painful. And I'm still angry. Like I said last week, I'm still angry at the world that's, taught me these things have to be that big of a deal. And I'm angry that I live in a world where my comfort level is dependent on how lucky I am to have, that group of friends and family. But I am where I am, and I'm trying really hard to see this as a chance to grow more than anything else. Just a chance to be happier and more comfortable, a chance to get more gender bullshit out of the way so I can present the core of myself more fully and truly to the rest of the world. So I did the thing. I sent the contact form into a voice therapy place here, and I asked them to call and schedule an appointment for me. I don't think a self-directed program via YouTube will work for me. I don't think that I'm just not enough of a self-starter in that way. So that's where I'm going. I literally took a break from writing this and sent the email. I got the call back, and at the end of May, I am starting voice therapy. So that's going to be a thing. So here's to the journey, my friend. Thanks for coming along with me, for gassing me up and helping me get there. I just really hope that in some way I'm doing the same for you. Thank you so much, my friend, for listening. You want to help keep this thing going, please consider heading over to patreon.com/queersplaining and making a pledge to support the show. Another great way to help is to share the show with your friends, share us out on social media, text a friend, shout about it to a stranger from a safe social distance, whatever's your thing. It all helps, and it's all appreciated. Before I go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friend, my name is Callie Wright, and this is Queersplaining.